I was standing at the bottom step of her father's porch, one hand resting on the warm hood of my car. Evening sun slanted gold across the shingled roof. The black iron lantern clicked softly as its bulb came to life. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and weathered cedar, and cicadas were starting behind the house. Hannah turned and introduced me to the man in the doorway, salt and pepper hair, calm smile, the stillness of someone who already knows what he is looking at. "So you're the one she talks about?" I could not answer. Past his shoulder, on the windowsill, sat a small wooden bird I had carved 8 months ago. Its head was turned toward me. That ride was never just a ride. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Marcus Ellis. I am 39 years old, and I work as a residential architect at a firm called Prescott and Vale. Based in the Noda Arts District of Charlotte, North Carolina, I design small houses for real people. Starter homes, modest remodels, the kind of places that will never make a magazine cover but will hold every birthday, every argument, every quiet morning that makes a life worth living. I have been doing this work for 11 years, and I am good at it, though I have never been the type to say that out loud. I am not the kind of person people notice in a room. I work slowly, I speak when I have something worth saying, and I learned a long time ago that if you stay quiet long enough, people will eventually move on. Vanessa moved on like that. I was married once. Her name was Vanessa. We divorced 4 years ago. No children. She wanted a different life, her exact words, and I understood that what she really meant was a different version of me. One who talked more at parties. One who chased promotions the way he chased clean lines on a blueprint. I was not that version. She kept her maiden name hyphenated with mine, and walked away with half our social circle and most of the noise that used to fill our house. I kept the one-story bungalow in Plaza Midwood, the quiet, and the mortgage. My life after the divorce became a ritual. Up every morning at 5:40. Pour over coffee, black, no sugar, brewed slowly while the sky outside the kitchen window turned from gray to blue. Then 7 miles on my bicycle down the Little Sugar Creek Greenway before the city woke up. Tires humming on wet asphalt, the air smelling like pine and damp earth. I arrived at the office before anyone else and left after everyone had gone. In the evenings, I sat in my garage and carved wood, a habit I learned from my grandfather in Mobile, Alabama. He used to say, "Busy hands keep a loud mind honest, Marcus." I believed him then. I believe him now. At the firm, I kept to myself. There was Denise Park, the senior project manager, sharp, quietly protective, and the only person at Prescott and Vale who knew I was divorced. She never brought it up unless I did, which was almost never. And there was Todd Vale, the co-founder's son, who laughed too loud at his own jokes and borrowed money he never remembered to return. Then there was Hannah Whitaker. She joined the firm in November the year before, a draftswoman who sat at the desk across from mine behind a frosted glass partition that blurred her silhouette like a watercolor. She was quiet. She drafted by hand with a 2H pencil when everyone else had gone digital. She drank chamomile tea instead of coffee, from a white ceramic mug she brought from home. I noticed her the way I notice a clean elevation drawing, appreciated it, acknowledged it, moved on. Denise leaned over my desk one afternoon, coffee in hand, giving me that look she gets when she is about to say something I do not want to hear. "Marcus, you know Hannah notices you, right?" I smiled without looking up. "She notices my drawings, Denise. Not me." One evening in March, something small happened. I had finished carving a wooden dove the night before, walnut, about the size of my closed fist, and brought it to the office to set on my desk while I worked. A quiet anchor. By the end of the day, the dove was gone. I checked my bag, my car, the break room. I asked the janitor. No one had seen it. I told myself I must have misplaced it. But I knew I had not. I just chose to let it go. That is what I did with things that vanished from my life. I let them go and did not look back, until that Friday afternoon. Hannah's car would not start in the parking lot. The engine turned over but would not catch. She stood beside her old Honda in the late sun, one arm around a cardboard tube of A3 paper, the warm light catching the loose strands of her hair. I walked over without thinking about it. "How far is your place? I can give you a ride." She gave directions in a voice so quiet, I turned the radio down to a murmur just to hear her. We drove out of Noda and onto Independence Boulevard, heading southeast toward Matthews, and what should have been a 22-minute trip stretched into 40 because of traffic stacked up past the Idlewild Road exit. Neither of us seemed bothered. She kept one hand on the cardboard tube resting across her lap, fingers curled around it like she was protecting something breakable. I talked about a cottage renovation I was finishing in the Dilworth neighborhood, a 1920s bungalow, with original heart pine floors, and a screened porch that needed rebuilding from the joists up. She listened with a stillness that made me feel like my words were actually landing somewhere, not just drifting into the air the way they usually did. Then she started talking about her father, Robert Whitaker, 66 years old, A carpenter by trade, retired now after 3 decades of building custom doors, cabinets, and furniture by hand. His most notable work, she said, was the set of black walnut doors he had crafted for Myers Park Baptist Church in the mid-90s hand-carved panels, with a grain pattern he had matched across 6 separate boards, so precisely that the seams were invisibly. She described it the way a daughter describes her father's best work, casually, like it was simply a fact of the world, but with a warmth underneath that she could not entirely hide. The traffic inched forward. The evening sun dropped lower, casting long amber shadows across the dashboard. And then Hannah asked me something that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Do you still carve birds?" I did not respond immediately. I had never mentioned my carving to anyone at the firm except Denise. Not in passing, not in conversation, not once. I glanced at Hannah. She was looking straight ahead, her expression unchanged, as if the question were the most natural thing in the world. I did not ask how she knew. I let the question hang there between us, unfinished, like a rough piece of wood that had not yet been sanded smooth. We pulled into a quick-trip gas station on Monroe Road so she could run inside for a bottle of water. While she was gone, her phone lit up on the passenger seat. The notification preview showed a text from a contact saved as Dad. It read, "Remember to tell him to come through the back door. Mom is sleeping." I looked away before I could read the rest, but I had read enough. Something about that text, the assumption that there was a him, the casualness of it, the preparation made me feel like I had stepped into a story that had been in progress long before I knew I was a character in it. When we reached her house, a gray craftsman-style home on a tree-lined street in Matthews, with a stone foundation and a wide wraparound porch, I pulled around toward the back, following the implicit instruction of that text. But Robert Whitaker was already standing at the front door, hands in his pockets, smiling. He had decided not to follow his own directions. Hannah froze for half a second beside me, her lips parting in what might have been surprise or might have been mild exasperation. Then she recovered, smooth as a finished joint. "Dad, this is Marcus." Robert stepped off the porch and walked toward me with a deliberate, unhurried gait. He shook my hand firmly. His palm was rough and deeply calloused. His right index finger curved slightly inward at the first knuckle, the permanent signature of 30 years of gripping a chisel. He looked at me from my shoes to my face, slowly, without any hostility. It was not an inspection. It was a confirmation, the way you check a finished frame against the original blueprint, and you find that everything lines up. "So you're the one she talks about?" Hannah went completely still beside me. I could feel her holding her breath. The way you hold your breath when a door you have been leaning against suddenly begins to open. Robert invited me inside for tea. The house smelled like bergamot and old wood and something faintly floral, lavender maybe, or dried roses. A pendulum clock ticked steadily in the hallway, marking time with a patience that matched the house itself. I sat in the living room, in a worn leather armchair that faced the front window, and that is when I saw it. On the windowsill, next to a small ceramic vase of dried lavender, sat my wooden dove. The same one, walnut, the size of a closed fist, the one that had disappeared from my desk in March. I stared at it for a long moment. Hannah was standing 3 steps away from the windowsill, looking at the floor, the ceiling, her own hands everywhere except at me or at the bird. Then I looked at the wall above the bookshelf across the room. There, behind glass, in a simple dark frame, was a hand-drawn elevation, a small residential facade sketched in 2H pencil on translucent tracing paper. I recognized it immediately. It was my first solo draft at Prescott and Vale, an elevation I had designed for a modest single-family home in the Belmont neighborhood. I had thrown it into the recycling bin more than 2 years ago because I thought the proportions were off. The roofline too tentative, the whole thing too unpolished to represent the kind of architect I wanted to become. Hannah had retrieved it. She had taken it to a frame shop. She had hung it on her father's living room wall. Robert settled into his chair across from me and poured tea from a blue ceramic pot. He told me that since his heart surgery the previous March, he had not been getting out much. His world had narrowed to this house, this porch, this view of the dogwood tree in the front yard. Hannah came home every evening after work and sat with him. Sometimes she read to him. Sometimes she just talked about her day, about the projects at the firm, about the tracing paper and the light through the drafting room windows. And there was one name, he said, that appeared in those evening conversations more often than any other. Not every single night, but enough. Enough for an old man recovering from surgery to start paying attention. Enough for him to begin forming a picture of someone he had never met. He smiled gently, setting his teacup on the side table. "She doesn't say a lot about you, just a little every day. I have been waiting for you to show up." When Robert stood to go to the kitchen to refill the teapot, I turned to Hannah. My voice was low, almost a whisper. "Hannah, your car, was it really broken?" She looked down at her hands in her lap. Her fingers were interlaced, knuckles slightly white. "The starter still turns," she said quietly. But my dad wanted to meet you before she stopped. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The word before hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of a timeline I was only beginning to understand, a countdown she and Robert had been keeping, that I had known nothing about. I was not angry. I should have been, maybe. But what I felt instead was something like vertigo, the sensation of realizing that someone has been watching you build a wall around yourself, brick by brick, for 4 years, and they have been quietly standing on the other side of it the entire time, waiting for you to stop. I drove home that evening with the warmth of Robert's handshake still embedded in my palm and the scent of bergamot clinging to my shirt. On the passenger seat, Hannah had left behind a folded piece of paper. I opened it at a red light on Independence Boulevard, the engine idling, the traffic signal casting a red glow across the page. In her neat, precise handwriting, it said, "Thank you for not asking more." I folded it carefully and slid it into the pocket of my wallet, the same leather slot where I had once kept my wedding ring, before I finally threw it into a drawer and forgot about it. 3 weeks passed after that first visit. Hannah and I began eating lunch together slowly, without announcing it, without giving it a name. We would sit on the iron bench outside the office entrance with our takeout containers balanced on our knees, and she would tell me about something Robert had said that morning, or I would describe a design detail I was wrestling with, and neither of us would acknowledge that these lunches were becoming the part of the day I looked forward to most. Then a Sunday came that changed the temperature of everything. We were at the Atherton Mill Farmers Market, walking between the produce stalls in the late morning light, picking out heirloom tomatoes for Robert's dinner. The air smelled like basil and fresh bread and warm concrete. I was holding a paper bag in one hand and reaching for a Cherokee purple with the other, when I heard a voice I had not heard in 4 years. Vanessa was walking toward us, her arm linked through Todd Vale's, laughing at something he had just said. She was wearing sunglasses pushed up on her forehead, and a confidence I recognized like an old song, familiar, polished, performative. I did not know they were together. No one had told me. 6 months, apparently. Half a year of my coworker dating my ex-wife. And not a single person at the firm had thought to mention it. Vanessa spotted Hannah first. She smiled, not warmth, just the shape of it. "Oh, you're the girl from Todd's firm. Hannah, right?" Hannah nodded politely, her fingers tightening around the paper bag of tomatoes. She did not smile back. She simply held her ground with a quietness that made Vanessa's brightness look slightly desperate by comparison. Vanessa turned her attention to me then, touching my elbow lightly, steering me a few steps away from the stall the way she used to do when she had something to say that she believed was for my own good. Her voice dropped to the register she reserved for concern that was really control. "Marcus, I am only telling you this because I still care about you. Todd told me she applied to the firm 8 months ago. She specifically asked to be placed next to you. She looked up your name on LinkedIn 3 months before she even interviewed." She paused, letting each sentence settle like sediment. "Her father is very sick, Marcus. Heart surgery. She needs someone stable, someone reliable. You are convenient." That word, convenient. It landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I did not respond to Vanessa. I walked back to Hannah, picked up the bag of tomatoes, and drove her home in a silence that was different from all the silences we had shared before, heavier, edged, full of something I had not felt in a long time. Doubt. Not doubt about Hannah exactly. Doubt about myself. About whether I was capable of being chosen for the right reasons, or whether I was simply the kind of man that women settled for when they needed stability and mistook it for love. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 5:15, a full hour earlier than usual. The building was empty. I logged into the shared HR portal and opened Hannah's employment file, something I had never done for any colleague in 11 years. Under the section for team placement preferences, there was one line, preferred team, Ellis Desk, residential. She had asked for me by name before she ever set foot in the building. I stared at that line until the screen dimmed. That afternoon, Todd Vale caught me in the print room. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, blocking the exit with the casual entitlement of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "Look, Marcus, don't let Vanessa mess with your head," he said. Then he paused and uncrossed one arm. "But she is not entirely wrong about the girl." I looked at him. I said nothing. I said nothing so completely and for so long that Todd eventually shifted his weight, dropped his arms, and walked away without another word. Tuesday evening, I drove to Hannah's house without calling ahead. I had no speech prepared. I had no plan. Robert opened the front door, took one look at my face, and said only, "She is in the back garden." I walked around the side of the house and found Hannah watering her rosemary plants in the fading light. The air smelled green and sharp, almost medicinal. She heard my footsteps on the gravel path and turned around, and the moment she saw my expression, she knew. She set the watering can down carefully on the brick edging. I did not raise my voice. I have never been a man who raises his voice. You applied to the firm to get close to me, didn't you? It was not a question. She met my eyes. Yes. Because your father is sick? She looked at me for what felt like a long time. The wind chimes on the porch behind her rang once, faintly, and then went still. No, she said. Because I saw you once, at Myers Park Baptist Church, in the winter of 2023. You came to inspect the black walnut doors my father had built for a restoration project. I was sitting in the last pew. You did not see me. She paused. I saw you. The light had shifted to deep amber. The rosemary under my shoes released its scent with every small movement. My father getting sick just meant I could not afford to be a coward anymore, she said quietly. I stood there in her garden, and I felt something give way inside me, not dramatically. Not like a collapse, but like a door whose hinges had been slowly rusting and finally let go. That evening, Vanessa called. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Her voice was sharp, clipped, urgent in the way that people become when they realize they are losing influence over someone who used to let them lead. Marcus, I heard you are still seeing her. I just want to say this: 4 years ago I left because you had no ambition. You still don't. She will figure that out soon enough. I listened to every word. I let each one arrive and settle into the silence between us. Then I spoke the first words I had said to Vanessa in 4 years. Thank you for leaving. I will not forget it. I hung up. I set the phone on the passenger seat and sat there in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled. Some truths are not weapons. They do not destroy you. They simply reveal who is actually standing beside you and who was only ever passing through. I sat in my car outside Hannah's house for a long time after that call. The porch light cast a dull, warm yellow glow across the front steps. Eventually, Robert appeared at my car window and tapped on the glass with one knuckle. He was holding the wooden dove in his open palm. She says this bird belongs to you, he said calmly. Take it home. Or leave it here. That is up to you. I looked at the bird in his weathered hand. I looked at the porch light. I looked at the house where his daughter had hung my discarded drawing on the wall like it was something worth keeping. I left the bird. That night, I sat alone in my garage, with a fresh block of walnut clamped in the vise and a chisel in my right hand, carving a second bird. My hands were trembling. Not from cold, the garage was warm, almost stuffy, the overhead bulb casting a yellow circle of light onto the workbench. The trembling came from somewhere deeper, from a place I had bricked over 4 years ago and convinced myself was solid ground. I had spent 4 years constructing a life that did not require anyone. 4 years of waking up at 5:40 in an empty house and calling it discipline. 4 years of carving wooden birds in a quiet garage and calling it peace. 4 years of arriving first and leaving last and believing that if I kept my hands busy enough and my evenings structured enough, I would never have to sit with the question that Vanessa's leaving had forced into the center of my chest. Was I someone worth staying for? And now a woman had answered that question without me ever asking it. She had answered it by applying to the right firm, requesting the right desk, sitting across from me for 8 months behind a frosted glass partition, taking a wooden bird from my desk and placing it on her father's windowsill like a prayer. She had answered it so quietly that I almost missed it entirely. I set the chisel down on the workbench. I pressed both palms flat against the surface and stood there with sawdust on my jeans and the garage light humming above me, and I told myself the truth for the first time in 4 years. I was afraid. Not of Hannah, not of what she had done or why she had done it. I was afraid of what it would cost me if I let her in, and she actually stayed. Because Vanessa had not stayed. And somewhere along the way, I had built an entire theology out of that departure. A belief system that said the people who leave are the honest ones, and the people who stay just have not found their reason to go yet. But Hannah was not staying because she had not left yet. She was staying because she had chosen. Deliberately. Specifically. Long before I knew her name. Saturday morning, I walked into Amelie's French Bakery on East Trade Street and sat at a small corner table near the window. The place smelled like fresh bread and warm butter and espresso. Sunlight came through the glass in wide amber columns, catching the flour dust in the air. Hannah arrived 5 minutes late, her hair still damp from a shower, a canvas bag over one shoulder. She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, steadying herself. I did not ease into it. I did not start with small talk or observations about the weather or compliments about the pastry selection. I am not angry that you applied to the firm, I said. I am angry that I spent 4 years making myself so unreachable that someone had to fill out an application just to get close to me. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. I continued, I do not need you to explain anything else. I do not need a timeline or a justification. I just need you to know this: I am not going anywhere, she cried then. Quietly, not the way Vanessa used to cry, loud, performative, designed to make me feel responsible. Hannah's tears came without permission, without ceremony. She did not wipe them away. She just let them fall onto the backs of her hands, still wrapped around the warm mug. The morning light from the window caught the tears on her knuckles like tiny pieces of glass. "I thought you would think I was too much," she whispered. "You are not too much," I said. "You are patient. There is a difference." My phone buzzed on the table between us, a text from Denise. Todd was maneuvering to have me removed from the firm's biggest project of the year, citing personal conflicts of interest. I read the message, turned the phone face down on the table, and looked at Hannah. Today was not about Todd. That afternoon, I drove to Robert's house. I stood on his front porch with my hands at my sides and asked him, formally, the way my grandfather taught me to ask for things that matter, whether I could come for Sunday dinner. Not just this Sunday, every Sunday. Robert laughed in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, his eyes bright with something that looked a lot like relief. "Son, did you think you were not already invited?" I told Hannah that evening that we were done hiding. Not at the firm, not in the parking lot, not anywhere. If Todd wanted me off the project, I would leave the project. If he wanted me out of the firm, I would leave the firm. I was old enough to open my own studio. I had been old enough for years. I just had not had a reason to make the leap. She smiled at me then, and it was the first time I had ever seen her smile without holding any part of it back. It was wide and unguarded, and it changed the shape of her entire face. "I have been waiting 8 months," she said. "I have got time." On the way out to the car, she reached into her canvas bag and pulled out the wooden dove, the first one, the one I had carved and lost and found again on her father's windowsill. She placed it in my hands. "Keep this one," she said, "but promise me something. When you carve the third bird, that one is mine." I promised. 6 months later, I resigned from Prescott and Vale. I signed a lease on a narrow brick storefront 4 blocks from my house in Plaza Midwood, and hung a sign above the door that read Ellis and Whitaker Design Studio. Hannah came on as my partner, not as a favor, but because her handdrafting skills were better than mine, and we both knew it. We worked side by side with no frosted glass between us. Denise told me that Todd and Vanessa had broken up 3 months after the farmer's market. I did not ask for details. Their story had nothing to do with mine anymore. Robert recovered well from his surgery. He came by the studio every Friday afternoon, carrying a foil-wrapped loaf of cornbread that Hannah's mother had baked that morning. He would settle into the old leather armchair by the front window and watch us work, sometimes offering a thought on joinery, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, content with what he had built. Those Fridays became the scaffolding of my weeks. For the first 6 months, neither of us said the word love. We did not need to. We had our own language by then. Hannah left a cup of chamomile tea on my desk every morning before I arrived, always in her white ceramic mug, always still warm when I sat down. I left a small hand-drawn sketch in her desk drawer every afternoon before I went home. One day, it was a cottage on a hillside with a chimney sending a single line of smoke into a still sky. The next day, a door frame with morning light pouring through it. Once, just a bird in flight, a simple ink line, 3 strokes, barely there. We spoke in tea and pencil lines and silence, and it was the most fluent conversation I had ever had. One evening in autumn, we were sitting on Robert's front porch after dinner. The air had turned cool, carrying the scent of dry leaves and chimney smoke from somewhere down the block. Hannah leaned against the porch railing, her face half lit by the yellow glow of the lantern. Robert had gone inside to watch the evening news, leaving his chair empty beside mine. I said it without planning to, without preparing the words, without even deciding to open my mouth. "I love you." She did not say it back immediately. Instead, she reached across the space between us, took my hand, and pressed it flat against her chest, directly over her heart. I could feel it beating steady, sure, unhurried. "I know," she said softly. "I have known for a long time." That was enough. On New Year's Eve, my phone lit up with a long message from Vanessa. She apologized. She said she had been wrong about me, about what ambition was supposed to look like, about what she had walked away from. I read every word. Then I deleted her number. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness. There was simply no room left in my life for echoes of a voice that had once told me I was not enough. 2 years after I first drove Hannah home from the office, Robert Whitaker passed away on a quiet morning in April. He went in his sleep, peacefully, the way a man goes when he has finished everything he needed to finish and has no unresolved weight left to carry. Hannah called me at 5:47 in the morning. Her voice was calm and broken, at the same time fractured glass held together by will alone. I was at the house before the ambulance arrived. I found Robert in his bedroom, still and serene, the old quilt pulled up to his chest, the morning light coming through the window in pale gold. On the windowsill beside his bed sat 3 wooden birds, lined up in a row. The first was the walnut dove, the one Hannah had taken from my desk and kept on this same windowsill for over a year. the bird that had started everything. The second was a smaller wren I had carved for Hannah on her birthday the previous summer. The third was a cardinal I had carved for Robert and given to him on Christmas morning, a bright, proud little bird with its crest raised. He had accepted it with both hands, turned it over slowly, studied the grain. But he never said whether he liked it. Looking at it there, on his windowsill, next to the other two, I knew he had. Hannah stood beside me, steady in her grief, looking at the three birds lined up in the early morning light. She was not sobbing. Deep sorrow sometimes makes a person very still, very precise, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile architecture of holding it together. "He was waiting for you," she said softly. "Now he can go." 3 months after the funeral, we sat together on the front porch of Robert's house, our house now. We had moved in and kept everything. His clocks, his furniture, the walnut dining table he had built by hand in 1988, the lace curtains, the old pendulum in the hallway that still measured time with the same unhurried patience it always had. The black iron lantern by the front door still clicked softly when its bulb warmed up. Hannah was 6 months along. She took my hand and placed it on her belly, and I felt a small kick, deliberate, specific, like a knock on a door from the inside. "If it is a girl," I said, "what do you want to name her?" She smiled the way she smiles when she has already thought about something for a long time, and is only now letting me in on it. "Wren. A wren. The smallest bird in the forest, and the one that sings the loudest. Some love arrives like a storm, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. Mine arrived like a wooden bird on a windowsill. It sat there for 8 months, quiet and patient, waiting for me to turn my head and notice it had been there all along. I used to think that silence meant loneliness, that if no one was speaking, it meant no one was there. Hannah taught me that silence can also mean two people sitting on the same porch at the end of the day, needing nothing from each other except the sound of breathing and the slow, steady proof that they both chose to stay. The lantern clicked on. I looked up at it and remembered the first time I stood at the bottom of these steps, one hand resting on the warm hood of my car, watching a man I had never met smile at me from the doorway like he already knew how this story would end. He did know. He always knew. I am sitting on this porch right now, a block of walnut balanced in my lap and a chisel in my hand, carving the fourth bird. This one is for Wren, for the daughter who has not arrived yet but who already has a name, a place in this family, and a spot on the windowsill beside the other three. I used to believe that the right person would arrive loud enough that I could not possibly miss them. Vanessa arrived loud, and I missed myself entirely. Hannah came into my life quietly, patiently, and with purpose. But the purpose was never to capture me. It was to give me time to see her. Her father was standing in that doorway the evening I brought her home, and he asked me a question he already knew the answer to. He was not testing me. He was handing me something. He was entrusting me with the daughter he loved most in this world. A daughter he had come to trust me with through nothing more than the small, ordinary stories she told him every evening over tea. Some women do not come into your life to rescue you. They come to stand beside you while you rescue yourself, and then they stay. If someone has ever chosen you quietly, without announcement, without demand, were you awake enough to notice before they grew tired of waiting? And the person who deserves you most, how many times have they been standing right next to you while you were busy looking the other way? If Marcus and Hannah's story reached something inside you, hit that like button so I know you are here. Subscribe and turn on notifications every week. I tell a true story about people who loved slowly and loved right. And in the comments below, I want to hear from you. Who is the person who quietly waited for you to finally see them? I read every single comment. Your story might just be the one I tell next week.